So let me ask you a question. Have you ever wished that you could make your adult spiritual education ministry more effective? Hi, I'm Rob Devens, founder of growthclass.org, and God has given me the privilege of helping leaders of churches become more successful and better equipped to do the job that God has called them to do. And today, I want to talk to you about how to increase the effectiveness of your adult education ministry. You know, when I was just starting out in the ministry, I had a number of misconceptions. I grew up in a tradition where Sunday schools were very strong. And in fact, Sunday schools did almost everything that happened in the church that wasn't in the Sunday morning worship service. And then as I grew and I got into other ministry positions, I began to realize there were all kinds of things out there. I went to all the hot seminars. I ordered the hot curriculum. And I kept thinking that if I could just do what they were doing in their churches, it would be successful in my church too. I kept thinking there was some kind of silver bullet, and I kept trying to find it. But you know what? We did have successes in the churches that I served, but I began to realize that it was not when I was faithfully reproducing somebody else's ministry, but when I tweaked things, I changed things, I even designed things for our situation, for our church, and not somebody else's church. That's when things really began to be successful. Now, when you think about making your own ministry more successful, what are you thinking? Well, if you're like most people, you're thinking, how do I get more people to attend? Or how do I get more teachers? How do I get better teachers? How do I have a ministry that people will want to attend, that I don't have to keep trying to cajole and talk them into coming to, but that they will actually want to be there? How can we teach people things that really mean something so that we see changed lives, not just more information in the head? And then how do we get those people to really begin to grow? And when they are growing, how do we plug them back into the life of the church? Well, I will address some of these issues today. And then in future trainings, I'm going to address more of them. But in this video, I'm going to give you what I have found are the top 5 ways to increase the effectiveness of your ministry. So what is the number 1 way to increase the effectiveness of your ministry? You need to determine the purpose of the ministry. Now, why is this important? Well, you know what? If you don't know your purpose, how are you going to know if you are increasing the effectiveness? If you don't know what you're supposed to do, how do you know if you're doing it well? Does being more effective mean simply more people? Does it mean a broader curriculum? Does it mean more people actually changing? And of course, there may be unstated wins. You may not know them, but your elders do, or your church boss does, or if you're an associate, your senior pastor does. Maybe they think an effective adult education ministry will have 90% of the congregation in it. Is that even realistic? You may not know them, but you need to realize that those unstated assumptions are out there, and you may need to help change those assumptions. But you need to know the purpose of the ministry first. Now, it may be that it's not up to you completely. Maybe you will have to work with the elder board or your senior pastor to come up with the purpose of the ministry. But the fact is, you need to know that. Obviously, this may seem silly. It's so simple. But you would be amazed at how many people skip this step. In fact, it's so important that I will spend most of my time here. It may seem obvious, but why are you doing this ministry? You know, I was at a church, and I began to talk to some of the leaders and ask them about some of the successful ministries that they had had and what they were like. And it turned out that if a ministry had a lot of people come, and if there was this buzz that was created in the congregation, that to them was a successful ministry. In another church, I talked to them, and the senior pastor was really excited when new Christians became grounded in their faith. Well, you know what? Ministries for these two different types, or these two different purposes will look very different. Now, I need to tell you that the church that wanted lots of people in a buzz, when I began to talk to them and had a discussion with the leaders, it wasn't that they necessarily wanted a buzz, but they had an assumption that if a buzz were happening, there were other things that would be going on too. They assumed that what was being taught was connecting and meaningful. They assumed that it was done well. They assumed that the topic was an important topic. They assumed if there was a buzz that all of these things would be happening. So don't just kind of accept the first purpose that comes to mind, but look beneath it. Get underneath that first draft and really think about what you mean when you say you have a particular purpose. And in that purpose, you need to focus. You know what? You can't do everything. One time I was meeting with a Christian Education Committee, and they gave me their CE plan, and right in the first paragraph, they set out their purpose. And their purpose was to do evangelism by inviting friends and neighbors. To assimilate new members to the church, to teach God's Word systematically, to give opportunities for service, to create community and fellowship, to have socials outside of Sunday morning, to provide care for class members. In other words, when somebody was sick, they would care for them or bring food. When the new baby arrived, they would bring food. And to support a missionary through their Sunday school offerings. You know what? They could not possibly accomplish all of those things. It's better to do one thing well than to do 100 things halfway. You also need to think about your purpose and how does that fit with the strategy in the rest of your church. Your church has a number of things that it wants to accomplish, and it's best to take one purpose and do that one purpose well in one ministry, take another purpose, do that purpose well in a different ministry, and so on. So how does the purpose of your education ministry fit in with the strategy of the rest of the church? Another thing about the purpose is you need to know what it's not. Some leaders in one church were brought an idea by someone who was important and a longtime member, somebody they respected, and he had a great idea, he thought, for a class. And when he gave them the idea, they began to look down at it, and it was all of the things that happen not in a classroom, but in a small group. And they needed to tell that member that although it's a great idea for a small group, it wasn't a great idea for an education ministry or for a class. And so they needed to steer him to starting a small group instead of teaching a class. So you need to know what your ministry is not. And finally, you need to decide to tweak or overhaul the ministry purpose. Overhaul the ministry purpose. And you know what? In real life situations, sometimes what you have to do is tweak it now and overhaul later. You may have a ministry that's doing some great things. It's not doing yet what you want it to do, but it's not useless either. It wouldn't make sense to shut that ministry down and then take months to decide what the new ministry is going to look like and another number of months to build that new ministry. Sometimes in real life situations, what we have to do is we do the best with what we've got. We tweak it as best we can, and then while that ministry is running, we begin to plan for the launch of a new ministry that will really do what we want it to do. All right, the number 2 way to increase effectiveness is to cast your vision, communicate your vision. You know what? Every teacher and leader comes to your education ministry with their own purpose and goals. Maybe it's as simple as they want to help. Somebody asks them to teach and they want to help their friend. They want to do them a favor, and so they show up. Maybe they want to please the person who asked them. Maybe they want to convince others in their congregation that their particular brand of Christianity is the only way to go. It's the only right way to think. Maybe they're really excited about one aspect. Maybe they got into end times prophecies or spiritual gifts or prayer or healing. And they want to get everyone just as excited about their pet topic as they are. Maybe they want to garner respect and admiration. You know what? Hardly anyone sets out to be subversive and to work against you. But if you aren't really clear about what your goals for the ministry are, what the church's goals for the ministry are, then the only goals that they're going to be thinking about as they start to teach or to lead are the goals that they have in themselves. So you need to get your leaders on board. Help them to see the bigger picture. Help them to see the plan and the purpose for the ministry. Okay, third way to increase effectiveness is to get the right people doing the right things. You know what? Sometimes you have a volunteer. He's a great volunteer, or she's a great volunteer, but they're in the wrong spot. There was one church who had a person who wanted to teach. And so they put him in some teaching positions, and he did okay, but it wasn't great. But one time they needed a host. In this church, there are hosts and teachers in the class. The host welcomes people, introduces the teacher, creates a great atmosphere for the teaching to happen, takes care of treats and coffee and all of those kinds of things. And you know what? When the evaluations came back, that person who was hosting got the highest marks ever. And every time that person is in a class as a host, the class does well. It succeeds. And so your job then as a leader is to go to that person and say, you know what? God's gifted you to be a host, not so much as a teacher. And you know what? Our ministry can really use the gifts that you have in hosting. When you host, those classes succeed. You are an important part of that class. So you need to get the right people doing the right things. There was another time when a leader approached the people over the education ministry, and he had a class that he wanted to teach. And as they began to talk about it, it became clear that he had a completely different view of what was to happen in a classroom than the church leadership had. And you know what? After a number of conversations, he wasn't going to budge. And he wasn't changing his mind. And so the leadership decided it was better not to have him teach than to teach in a way that was going to thwart or hinder the purpose that they had determined. And sometimes you just have to do that. Get the right people doing the right things. Number 4, you need to know what's going on. You need to assess the situation. You know what? Maybe things are better than you think. Sometimes you can get someone who doesn't like something for some reason. They get bent out of shape for some reason, and they can become very vocal. Sometimes it's a small group. You need to know. Is that a feeling that everybody has, that all the people involved in that ministry think, or is it just something that one or two people think? You know what? The people who are in a ministry and are satisfied very often have very little to say. They're just going along enjoying what the ministry has to offer. And you need to know whether that's the case or whether you really need to make huge changes. Maybe you know you need to make changes, but how do you know what to change if you don't know what's going on? Finally, you need to know so that you can gauge if the changes you implement have any effect. How can you know if things have gotten better if you don't know what they were like before? Okay, so you need to, first of all, keep attendance. Take attendance. With names, not just numbers, not just how many people show up every week. And you know what? You can't use the old class attendance books that nobody but the teacher ever sees. There are lots of great programs. I have a picture here of one called Connection Power, and in it you can keep attendance, and you can then look and see if the person who is so critical has even been to any of the classes. You can see which people gravitate towards which teacher or which subject. You can see which of your leaders are involved. You know, if you design a great program, but if none of the elders, none of the pastors or elders' spouses and families are involved, it won't take long for the congregation to realize that that program you designed, it really isn't all that important after all. So, keep attendance. Another thing that you can do is you can put elders in classes. One church did this for two reasons. One, because they wanted to show the support for the classes, but two, the elders could then see what was going on and report back to the elder board and to the pastors and to the leadership. And this was turned out to be a great way for the church as a whole, or the church leadership as a whole, to know what was going on in those classes. Another thing that you can do is you can have your teachers record their classes. I have personally found this invaluable. You can pick up a recorder by watching online for sales. For $25, $30, $35, add a lapel mic to it, and you are set to go. And the neat thing about these new digital recorders is they record in a form that you can then plug into your computer, and it just downloads straight to your computer. You don't have to sort of re-record it onto your computer. And then you can take those classes, and actually we've put them on the internet so that if somebody misses a class, they can go to our website and find the class and catch up on what's been going on. And finally, another way you really need to work to assess what's going on is use evaluation forms. Last class, hand out an evaluation form and have people fill it out. Now in this area, again, you need to do something, you need some good software, and there are a lot of good ones. I personally use Survey Gold. And with that, I can actually have the survey online. And so if people are not there the last class, we can email them, because we have the attendance records. So we can email the people who are not at the last class. We can ask them to fill the evaluation out online. And of course, all of that, all the paper surveys can be put up online as well. It all gets downloaded to my computer, and I can take a look and divide up the information in all kinds of different ways, send copies of the evaluation forms for a particular class, when it's all put together, when the information is taken and put together. I can take that and send it to each class, each teacher, and so they can know how their class responded to all of the questions. So, you need to know what's going on. Use these things to do that. And finally, the fifth thing is promote well. We did a survey in one congregation, and one of the most checked answers for why they didn't attend an adult class was that they didn't know much about them. And you can probably guess that most of those people were the newer folks, exactly the ones you want to get plugged in. I visit churches a lot, and I'm always amazed at how long-timers, those people who've been around, always assume that everyone else knows what's available and how things work and when they happen. In fact, I've heard a conversation very similar to this. "Oh, I didn't know about that." And the person who'd been there forever replied, well, it's always on the first Tuesday of March. You know what? If you have a growing congregation, you need to continually bring the new people into the loop. And if your congregation isn't growing, you still need to communicate well. In fact, there have been some studies that show that for a congregation to really get some important piece of information, it needs to come to them as many as 7 separate times. And so you need to use a number of different channels. You need to announce it. Put it in a bulletin. Put it on Facebook. Announce it again. Put up posters about it. Put it in a newsletter. Email the church about it. Talk about it in your sermons. And announce it again. You need to promote well. Well, we've talked about increasing the effectiveness of your ministry through determining its purpose, communicating its vision to the leaders, getting the right people doing the right things, knowing what's going on, and finally promoting it well. And I hope that you will take these things that you've learned today and put them into practice. I know with God's help that you will be able to do that. It's not difficult. The things that I've talked about are in some sense are not rocket science, and yet they are very important to having an effective and useful and purposeful ministry. Now, I want to give you some more support. And so the next teaching in this series is what type of ministry best fits your church. There are basically 3 types of spiritual instruction that happen on Sunday morning. I'm going to tell you what they are, and I'm going to talk to you about the strength and the weaknesses of each. And in fact, if you will just give me your name and your email right here on the right hand side here, and click the button there, then you can access that right here and go to the next teaching. I would also like you to contact me if you are interested in having me do a consultation, or if you would like some personal coaching. And you can do that right on the right side as well, just underneath the other one. And I want to tell you just a little bit more about the consultations that I do. I do consultations with churches, and I come to your church and I work with your leaders. And we take a detailed look at your church. We look at the ministries, we look at your purposes, we try and figure out how things are going. We do an all-church survey. We meet with your leaders. We try to find out what people are thinking and where they are and what they see as the important issues. And then we give you guidance as you define the purpose for an adult education ministry. This step in itself is invaluable because it will help you align all of your ministries. Then we help you design a course of action to take, and then we coach you and your leaders through that course of action. So, if you're interested, sign up for that on the right-hand side. Thank you, and I pray that God will guide you and give you success as you work to increase the effectiveness of your ministries.